Thanks, everyone. This is the Ask April and Cindy series, and I'm April.
And I'm Cindy, and this is the first of our series of travel tips. Welcome, everybody. Tonight we're talking to April about the best ways to find tour guides. So whether you're taking a trip for 4 days and you're looking for a tour guide, or whether it's just an hour guide through a museum, selecting the right guide can make or break the entire experience. So welcome, April.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat about this tonight.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's just dive right in and talk about what are some of the ways that you would suggest that someone goes about finding a tour guide?
If you're looking for a guide for yourself, I think it's important to do a search. You can do an internet search based on your interest. I get really detailed sometimes. Sometimes I'll put in like photography guide, night photography guide, Budapest, or if it's art history, or if you're interested in local foods or local restaurants, even words like walking versus full day, half day, hour. I mean, just that'll really narrow it down. There's also a lot of wonderful websites now that can help you find a guide specific to your needs. You may not necessarily stay in an Airbnb, but you can go on Airbnb experiences and type in your city. I made a slide there. I just used Budapest since I was recently doing some research on Budapest. And you can put in a block of days, maybe days, so that the search results that come back will be a little bit wider and broader. And then oftentimes this will give you a good starting. This site will tell you how many hours, what's included. Some might start hone down what you want to, what you actually are needing for a guide. If you want something more general or something really needlepoint specific. I mean, there's specific tours for every interest. You could take a World War II history walking tour. You could take a art lover's guide of Paris, or as I mentioned, photography tours, but they can be very specific, or you might just have an overview of the city for an hour or 2 hours. What I like about Airbnb experiences is oftentimes these are all pretty much locals that live in these destinations. So you won't have someone that's coming from another place as such and taking you around as someone that is their, that's their town, that's their city, that's their backyard. The next one I found was free tour. So there's a lot of wonderful free tours, and this is often a place where students or someone that's been maybe a history professor, you'd be surprised at the quality of guides often on these free tours. They have a love for their city. I took a free tour in Santa Barbara, and it was a gentleman who taught many years and just had a love for his city and sharing all of the interesting little stories about the buildings, the places. And so he just decided to take it upon himself to start giving free tours. So that just because the word free is in there doesn't always negate the quality of the tour that you're going to get. With a free tour, you may have people on your tour naturally, because it's a free experience in that city. So that might be something to keep in mind. But as you can see from freetour.com, many of these cities have multiple choices for free tours available. Another site that many of us are probably familiar with or not, this one is With Locals. Withlocals.com, you can do private tours. So again, if you're just looking for a one-on-one experience, you can choose, put in where you're going and then your dates, how many people, if it's you yourself. Sometimes it is a little bit more expensive to have a guide just for yourself or your family. But this is a great place to, again, find names. Often they'll list their experience and really cater the trip or your time to what you're looking for. And this can be so helpful. I know when I had a free day in London, I really wanted someone to take me to the gardens outside of London. And so I started that communication by searching through one of these sites and just emailing and finding out like what was possible. Just because you go search one of these sites, you're not, set that you have to pick that site. It's just a starting point in many ways. What I like about TripAdvisor, that's the next one, tripadvisor.com, it's extremely well known. As a guide myself, I do know it can be hard to get listed on TripAdvisor, so you may not find everyone that's available in a given city, or someone that hasn't been doing it for a long time or doesn't lead large tours. So read through the comments. The nice thing about TripAdvisor is you do, when you pull up the trip, you will see that it'll tell you who's leading the trip. Like one of them says Budapest locals. And then I would just do a Google search for Budapest locals, because sometimes these sites, whether it's with locals or TripAdvisor or any of them, they sometimes take a small portion of that guide's actual money. So if you can book direct, as we often talk about, you're going to save yourself some money, and you're also helping the guide or the company if they're small and getting started. But read through the reviews with a grain of salt, as we always say about anything. Do your research, do your homework. Learn about the pros and cons. Read the bad reviews. I often read the bad reviews too, just to find out what may have happened. Maybe it was the individual person that took the tour. They weren't they picked the wrong experience. And I think a lot of ownness has to come back on you when you're choosing a guide, is to ask questions and really make sure that you're aligning yourself with what your expectations are. And then the last one is tours by locals. And tours by locals are in many of the larger cities like Los Angeles. As you can see there, I did a search for Budapest, and there's 34 local guides. That is a lot of guides to choose from. The wonderful thing about tours by locals is you're easily able to go on each of their profiles. I know I personally used this site when I was searching for a guide outside of London. And I could look up the gentleman, I could do some more reading. It gave me his, what degrees he had, what his areas of interest were. And then I conversely could look at other people that gave a similar tour and say, you know what, that person has just a different viewpoint on things. Or, maybe that person is younger than I'd hoped to have the information that I'm hoping to gain from the trip or the experience. So really good choices now on the internet, far more than we ever had before the internet. But I also advise people to read, if you have a Rick Steves guidebook. I love Rick Steves' recommendations often. And in his book, he'll often list guides he's used. With anything, research and planning ahead is going to go a long ways in finding a guide. Ask friends. I know a lot of people use Facebook. You can find recommendations via Facebook. If you start telling friends and family, I'm going to Budapest, you might be surprised who's used a guide and would be able to recommend someone, maybe even a personal friend or someone that will personally take you around.
Right. That's great. Yeah. And I've actually done a couple of those things. I found a tour guide on Facebook that has no web presence, but we used them through Facebook. Somebody recommended them. And then I've also had friends, like people that I've met, walk me through the local area. And sometimes that's even better than, you just buy them lunch or buy them dinner, and they take you, through their favorite places. It's a pretty spectacular way to view the place too.
Yeah, that is.
Like the handful of different places to go look for a guide. When would you say that you should start looking? I mean, how soon before you go on do you start looking for the guide you want to use?
Oftentimes, I start looking for the guide even before I've bought a plane ticket, believe it or not. I think it really goes back to how important your time, what time of year you're actually thinking about traveling. If you're traveling to, say, New England in the fall, which we know is high season for that area, it's very popular. Maybe the Christmas markets in Europe can be a very busy time. Any time where you already kind of have heard the buzz on that area, you might want to start looking for that guide up to a year in advance, at least 6 months, especially if it's someone, let's say you're really excited about a guide that Rick Steves has mentioned. Well, Rick Steves has millions of followers and fans. You're going to want to try to make contact with that person as soon as possible. If you're more flexible and you just, hey, it's a last minute trip, you're leaving next weekend because you got a great plane fare, Then you might want to use some of the other sources, like check with your friends, Facebook, tours by locals. They have more choices maybe open to you, but always the sooner the better, I think, in a lot of cases.
Right. Yeah, I've done both too. Where I've booked it way in advance because I wanted that particular tour.
Right.
Or I've arrived and I've like got a free day, so I start looking on TripAdvisor and I find somebody kind of at the last minute for next weekend or something like that. So, but of course, like you said, if there's a very specific tour that you want, like anything else, planning ahead will ensure that you can actually get that guide and that person. So when you're looking at that and you found something, what are some of the questions that we want to ask our tour guides to make sure that we have the experience we're looking for?
I think it's important to ask if it's, what the transportation situation is. Are you going to be walking? How far you might be walking, depending on, if it's you yourself, maybe, I know I took a mountain biking experience and I tried to be really specific, like, I'm not an expert, I'm really a novice. So that is seriously important. I mean, if it's I know we've talked to Matt, he gave a great talk in Peru, and he mentioned, walking the Inca Trail, you really need to be in shape for that, or altitude issues. So asking the physicality question, asking, what their interests are. Is this something they're really passionate about? I mean, if you're really serious about World War II history, I think it's really important to find someone that has a background in that very, very topic of interest. I might not use a history guide if I'm going to take a food tour and want just what's the hottest, newest food experiences. So asking, what their background is, what their interests are, what the physical restrictions, equipment, is there any special equipment? If you're taking a photography tour, you might want to ask, am I going to need a tripod? And if I don't have a tripod, oftentimes if the guide knows ahead of time, they're more than willing to bring that for you or help you locate that. I know the great thing about even going to Alaska, and you're going in the middle of winter when it's freezing cold, they'll actually rent you coats or equipment so that you can enjoy the experience. But that comes through that email exchange. Often emails are a really good way if you're not able to get on the telephone. Language, I think if we're traveling to another country, if we don't speak the language very well, we need to know how well they're speaking in English, or if they're not going to speak in English, if they're going to provide written materials for us to still enjoy that experience so that we can get the most out of it. And food. I always like to say, too, just being aware of food and snacks. If you're a person that needs to nibble along the way, and if you're going to be gone for a 4-hour walking trip in the city even, are you going to make breaks? Are there going to be breaks for snacks, or should you plan on bringing your own water and some snacks in your bag? These are things that are important to ask to ensure a better experience. And I think through the course of emailing and maybe even a phone or Skype conversation, you might get a sense of their personality. Some people are really, really serious, and maybe that's not your style. So you might feel that wasn't as a matched experience, whereas someone else is more, youthful and just goes with the flow. And maybe that's more in line with what your goal is to achieve for that particular, tour or experience.
That's great. Those are good tips on what you need to ask. And it sounds like just having some dialogue, at least over email, with your guide ahead of time will help ensure, because it's not always printed, in this guide, this tour includes. You might have questions, and making sure you get those questions answered will help. And so then we've talked a little bit about some of the free tours. What are your experiences with free versus paid, and what do you recommend there?
I think it depends, again, on maybe your time or your goal. I've taken some amazing free tours, even at the last minute. If I've arrived in a city and now I realize, your day can change. As travelers, we've all had to learn to be flexible. Maybe something you'd already planned on, like a museum, you find out now is closed. So now it's like, oh, I've got 2 hours this afternoon and I'd really like to explore the city. What can I see? Oh, there's a free tour. And some of these free guides, I'm telling you, they're really entertaining. London has a really great system of free tours. I went at Christmas time, and their knowledge of Charles Dickens' history and the buildings and what I was looking at was fabulous. Now, there were a lot of people, so you got to keep that in mind. So if you want something more intimate that's smaller, I always highly recommend, looking for the paid tour. I think it's also important to point out, if you're taking a free walking tour and you had a really good experience, tipping is appreciated by all of these guides, whether it's online. A lot of them offer an option to tip online. And if you don't feel compelled to even, you're tight on, we've all been budget experiences, leaving reviews, go online and leave some feedback. I mean, feedback these days goes miles, and the guides really, really appreciate, especially if they're just getting started, post on Facebook, TripAdvisor, whatever site they're on. So I think there's some really great free tours. I would never negate a free tour. If at all possible, I would include one.
Yeah, I've had some amazing free tours myself. And because they're working typically for tips, right? That's really what the free tour is about. They're hoping that they'll get a few tips from some of the members. They are extremely entertaining, and they're usually very, very good. They really reach high so that they can make the experience the best for you.
Yeah.
I know in Washington, D.C., we had a historical tour, and our guide, he was funny and energetic, and it was a big group of people, but it was a lot of fun. So I agree with the free versus paid. Like, sometimes those frees are better because they're working really hard to make sure you have a good experience. Right. And good suggestion about giving a review, regardless of whether you tip or not. Always good if you had a good experience to go in and let somebody know that they did a great job and let the rest of the world know. So let's talk about just some specialty type of things. Are there tours? I mean, there's obviously different tours. We talked about Matt and his adventure tour where he was hiking. Right. And what is your take on whether to pick those type of experiences and how to select those specialty tours?
I think depending on how much time you have in the city, I think it's really good to always take an overview tour of the city. If you're not with a tour group that's offering that, I always, as soon as I arrive in a city, if you've got an hour even, take one of those hop-on, hop-off buses. Those are fabulous. And you can get a quick lay of the land, so you kind of know how far it is to walk to this or that. You might find that you're walking distance to some great areas you want to come back to. If you have an interest in food, I've had some amazing food tours, and they're really helpful. Look at the price. Some can be very pricey, but if you look for some of the ones that maybe run around lunchtime, I've gotten more than a meal's worth of food for, and the history and the background of a location and why they may have multiple restaurants serving a particular dish, or why rice is important to this, like in Charleston, some of the dishes you'll see repeated over and over and why that is. So I think it really goes back to what your interests are, but I always try to mix it up, maybe a quick bus tour, like the hop on, hop off bus. If you're more inclined to walk, there's some really great city walking tours that can give you a good overview of the city. They don't always have to take multitude of time. They can be an hour, a couple hours. And then maybe if you do want to eat some great food and, art, right, if those are your interests, I think that's a great use of your time.
Okay. And so what if you have a bad experience? What if you go on a tour, and what is your recourse? What do you do? How do we handle that if you didn't enjoy the experience? Can you share a little bit about
that? I would definitely try to reach out to the guide. And the sooner you can communicate. I mean, if you're in even a large group, I know sometimes in the free tours, even they'll ask, hey, can everyone hear? Raise your hand if you can't hear. Try to navigate towards the front of the group. We all, as a person taking the tour, we as guides too, we don't know if you're uncomfortable, if you need to stop. So by all means, as soon as you can say something or pull the guide aside, even if sometimes you have to walk from place to place, try to run up there and grab the guide's attention and just say, hey, I need this. I need to find a bathroom, or whatever it is. The sooner you can try to negotiate that or get that settled, you're going to at least hopefully salvage the tour for yourself. If you're traveling with other people, sometimes I know my travel mates, we get to the location and they'll ask the guide like, hey, how long is this tour? Oh, wow, it's going to be 4 hours. And then they can decide like, you know what, I'm going to meet you back here later after you do the tour. And if you've actually gotten all the way through the tour, I mean, it's happened to all of us, and we just really feel like, you know what, that wasn't worth the money, I would still try to reach out personally before you go online. I know a lot of people now just hit the internet and, air their grievances right there online, but that's not even giving a chance to the business or to the individual tour guide who, their livelihood may depend on this. I mean, give them an opportunity to maybe offer you some money back. Maybe they'll give you, a discount off a future tour, some sort of, something to compensate you depending on what the issue was and what you felt went wrong.
Right. Right. Yeah, because I think that we all go quickly to the review, like, oh, it was terrible, and you go to say that. But maybe even if you reached out during the tour and you didn't get what you wanted, but after the tour, go back to the guide and go, this is what didn't work for me, and give them that opportunity. I think that really helps the guide both grow as well as you get a better sense of whether they were really just it was a terrible guide, right? or whether or whether they, just truly didn't understand your need or whatever that was, and it will make you'll then have a better review, right? You can explain what happened
exactly
a little bit better, because I think it's important if you have a negative experience to share that, because nobody else wants to have that, but maybe it was just a one-off thing too. So that's some really good advice. And so let's talk about just some of your own experiences, April. Have you had a guide or a trip that you really enjoyed, and can you tell us a little bit about what that was and what made that so wonderful?
Yeah, I know we've talked a little bit about some of the free tours, and I think those are oftentimes really, really entertaining. I've been to some cities in Europe where the guides have amazing stories. They show up in costume and they just really share what they love. But for me, the first time I went to Alaska, I didn't really, I didn't know my camera. I didn't know how to take pictures of the Northern Lights. So I was really blessed to find a guide that was very technical and took a lot of time with each of us explaining on our particular model. And he worked with each person in the group and really got us set up, because those situations can quickly become very frustrating. Because I've also taken night photography experiences where they've got such a big group and they don't always have time to get to each person for technical questions. And then you start to struggle, and now you're like getting frustrated that, you're not able to capture the picture or whatever. So I think just, again, ask a lot of questions ahead of time. I've learned myself when I'm looking for a tour guide to ask a lot of questions, and what the tour guide's expectation that they think you're going to enjoy and what you are looking for can be so different. I booked a guide for my day outside of London, and the guide had picked certain gardens, and just doing then a quick research on my own, I was like, oh, but there's like this castle that's over here. Why can't we include that? And when I messaged him by email back, he was like, well, I don't think there's much there to see. And then I typed again, and I'm like, no, I've seen some pictures. And as a photographer, it may not have a lot of history left because it's a shell of a castle. And he's like, okay, we'll include it. And that was like the highlight of my day. And he'd actually forgotten what a beautiful place it was. So it was kind of a win-win. But had I just sat back and not said anything ahead of time, we would have missed that particular spot. And, I might have been disappointed.
Right. I think that one thing that you've said that I think is important to take away is that it's a personality thing, right? When we're talking about a tour guide, and I think that extra communication early on helps you realize, is this person gonna, do they share the love of whether it's history or photography or whatever in the same way that you do, and are you gonna get that from them? And there's no right or wrong, right? There's a trip for everyone, so you may want something different than someone else. So just because they're selling tours online and other people enjoy it doesn't mean you will enjoy it, right? So I think that's a really
Right.
important message that we've gotten here, is that it's okay to ask questions. And as a tour guide, we like those, right? You want to hear like their
Right.
questions from
Right.
the people. So then I'll ask another experience question. Have you ever had an experience where you didn't get what you needed, or some sort of mishap or a challenge with a tour?
I think well, I know the mountain biking experience was a little bit challenging. I got in a little over my head, I'll admit. And that was, but it was still, it turned out really fine in the end. It's just, again, I should have asked right from the get-go, like, how difficult is the trail?
Right.
You know, should I be more prepared? But you know, the guide too, he was very well versed in safety and first aid. And so, you know, I don't know that I've really had quite a mishap. I know as a leader, a tour leader, and a guide myself, I know sometimes it's been maybe there's situations where you're going to be driving for long periods of time. And so now I try to think of that, because I know some people aren't used to sitting for long periods of time. And I don't want one of my participants to have a mishap and be stuck in a car like, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd be sitting here for 4 hours before we can have a real meal or something. So,
Right.
you know, it kind of goes both ways.
Right.
So communication is just huge. I can't say enough about it.
Yeah, and I'm glad we talked about this topic, because I think when you're planning your trip, a lot of times your trip is made up of a lot of these little tours, right? Unless you take an all-inclusive 4-day with one guide, which you can do, or 8 days. If you kind of go on your own, you're picking lots of different little tours, like a 2-hour tour day here, or half an hour, or half a day. And those things will make or break your whole vacation, right? You can have one experience that was like, that was phenomenal, and I'm so glad I did that. And it was just a half a day little thing. It might even be a free thing that you did. So it's a great way to make sure you have a great experience, is picking the right people to lead you when you're going on these tours. So thanks, April. I think we're at the 25-minute mark or so here. So let's just open it up for questions and see if anybody has any.